Hey, ya folks, and welcome to MacArthur Public Library's Young Adult Read Along. Today I am starting with chapter 28 of Cinder by Marissa Meyer, read with permission by the publisher. Chapter 28. The uncomfortable silence of the dining hall was broken only by the clatter of chopsticks against porcelain and the shuffling of servants' feet. Only human servers were present, a concession to Levana's avid distrust of androids. She claimed it went against her people's morals and the laws of nature to bestow fake emotions and thoughts on man-made machines. Kai knew, however, that she just didn't like androids because she couldn't brainwash them. Sitting opposite the queen, Kai found himself struggling not to look at her. It was both a temptation and a repellent, and both feelings irritated him. Torin was beside him, and Levana was flanked by Sybil and the second thaumaturge. The two lunar guards stood against the walls. Kai wondered if they ever ate. The emperor's seat at the end of the table would remain empty until the coronation. He did not want to look at that empty chair either. Levana made a grand, flourishing gesture, drawing everyone's attention to her, though it resulted in nothing more than taking a sip of her tea. Her lips curled as she set the cup down, her gaze meeting Kai's. Sybil tells me your little festival is an annual occurrence, she said, the cadence of her voice swooning like a lullaby. Yes, said Kai, lifting a shrimp wonton between his chopsticks. It falls on the 9th full moon of each year. Ah, how lovely for you to base your holidays on the cycles of my planet. Kai wanted to scoff at the word planet, but sucked it back down into his throat. It's a celebration of the end of the Fourth World War, said Torin. Levana clucked her tongue. That is the problem with so many little countries on a single globe. So many wars. Something splattered on Kai's plate. He looked down to see that the wonton's filling had been squeezed from its wrapper. Perhaps we should be glad the war happened then, and force the countries to conglomerate as they did. I hardly think it harmed the well-being of the citizenry, said Levana. Kai's pulse throbbed in his ears. Millions had died in the World War IV. Whole cultures had been devastated, dozens of cities reduced to rubble, including the original Beijing, not to mention the countless natural resources that had been destroyed through nuclear and chemical warfare. Yes, he was quite sure some harm had come to the citizenry's well-being. More tea, Your Highness, said Torin, startling Kai. He realized he'd been gripping his chopsticks like a weapon. Grumbling inwardly, he sat back down, allowing his servant to refill his cup. We can give credit to the war for bringing about the Treaty of Bremen, said Torin, which has thus far been beneficial to all countries in the Eastern Union. We hope, of course, to see your signature on the document soon, Your Majesty. The Queen's lips tightened against her teeth. Indeed, the good of the treaties is thoroughly discussed in your history books. And yet I cannot help feel that Luna, a single country ruled by a single government, provides an even more ideal arrangement, one that is fair and beneficial to all inhabitants. Assuming that the ruling government is fair, said Kai. A flash of contempt set the Queen's jaw, but almost instantly faded into a serene smile, which of course Luna has, as is evidenced by hundreds of years without a single uprising, not even the smallest protest. Our history books attest to that. Shocking. Kai would have grumbled if he hadn't felt Torin's glower upon him. It is a testament that every ruler strives for, said Torin. The servants came forward and whisked away the first course, replacing it with silver tureens. My queen is as eager to forge a bond between Luna and Earth as you are, said Sybil. It is a shame that an agreement could not be reached upon under the rule of your father, but we are hopeful that you, your highness, will be more accepting of our terms. Kai again strove to loosen his grip, lest he accidentally leap across the table and jab a chopstick into the witch's eye. His father had tried every compromise imaginable to forge an alliance with Luna, except the one thing he could not agree to, the one thing he was sure would signal the end of freedom for his people, a marriage to Queen Levana. But nobody objected to Sybil's comment, not even himself. He couldn't get the image from today's meeting out of his head. The lunar mutations, the army of beast-like creatures, waiting. It chilled him not only because of what he'd seen, but of what he could imagine he hadn't seen. If he were right, then Levana had put her army out for show, as a threat. But he knew she wouldn't give her hand away so easily. So what else was she hiding? And did he dare risk finding out? Marriage. War. Marriage. War. The servants simultaneously lifted the silver domes from the trays, releasing clouds of steam-scented garlic and sesame oil. Kai mumbled a thank you to the servant over his shoulder, but the words were interrupted by a gasp from the Queen. She shoved her chair away from the table. The legs screeched across the floor. Startled, Kai followed the queen's gaze to her plate. Instead of thinly cut pork tenderloin and rice noodles, the plate harbored a small hand mirror set into a shimmering white frame. "How dare you!" Levana turned blazing eyes on the servant who had delivered the meal, a middle-aged woman with fine gray hair. The servant stumbled back, her eyes as round as the mirror. Levana stood so fast her chair tumbled to the floor behind her. A chorus of chair legs creaked on the floor as everyone stood. "Speak, you disgusting earthen! How dare you insult me!" The servant tossed her head mute. "Your Majesty," I started. "Sybil, my queen! This human has shown disrespect. It is not to be tolerated." "Your Majesty," said Torrin, "please, calm yourself. We do not know that this woman is to blame. We mustn't jump to conclusions." "Then she must be made an example of," said Sybil, quite coolly. "And the true perpetrator can thus suffer the guilt, which is often a far worse punishment." "That is not how our system works." His face had flushed red. "While you reside in the Commonwealth, you will abide by our laws." "I will not follow your laws so long as they permit disobedience to flourish," said Levana. "Sybil!" Sybil rounded the queen's fallen chair. The servant backed away, bowing, muttering apologies and begging for mercy, and not knowing what she said. "Stop it! Leave her alone!" said Kai, rushing toward the servant. Sybil snatched a knife from the service table and held its handle out toward the woman. The woman took the knife, crying, pleading as she did so. Kai's jaw dropped. He was both disgusted and memorized as the servant turned the blade toward herself, clutching the handle with both hands. Sybil's beautiful face remained complacent. The servant's hands trembled and slowly lifted the knife until the glistening edge was poised at the corner of her eye. "No," she whimpered, "please." Kai's entire body shook as he realized what Sybil meant to force the woman into. Heart racing, he squared his shoulders. "I did it!" The room stilled silence, but for the woman's bumbling sobs. Everyone turned to Kai. The queen, Torrin, the servant with a tiny inflamed scratch beside her eyelid, the knife still in her hand. "I did it," he repeated. He looked at Sybil, who watched him without expression, and then at Queen Levana. The queen fisted both hands at her sides. Her dark gaze seethed. Her complexion shimmered. In a single tilting moment she was hideous, with her ragged breath and sneering coral lips. Kai ran his dry tongue across the roof of his mouth. "I ordered the kitchen to put the mirror on your tray." He pressed his arms firmly against his sides to keep them from shaking. "It was meant as a friendly joke. I understand now that it was an ignorant decision, and a joke that would not cross cultural lines, and I can only apologize and ask for your forgiveness." He leveled his gaze at Levana. "But if forgiveness is not in your power, then at least direct your anger toward me and not the servant, who would have had no idea that the mirror was there. The punishment should be mine." He had thought the tension was bad during the appetizer course, but now he was choking on it. Levana's breathing returned to normal as her eyes weighed her options. She did not believe him. It was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it, but he had confessed. She opened her fists, stretching her fingers out against the material of her dress. "Release the servant." The energy dispersed. Kai felt his ears pop as if the air pressure in the room had changed. The knife clattered to the floor, and the servant stumbled back, crashing into a wall. Her shaking hands flattened over her eyes, her face, her head. "Thank you for your honesty, Your Highness," Levana said, her tone flat and hollow. "Your apology is accepted." The crying woman was led away from the dining room. Torrin reached across the table, picked up the silver dome, and covered the mirror. "Bring our most honored guest her entree." "That won't be necessary," said Levana. "I have quite lost my appetite." "Your Majesty," said Torrin. "I will retire to my quarters," said the queen. She was still battling Kai across the table, her eyes cold and calculating, and he unable to look away. "I have learned something valuable about you tonight, young prince. I hope you have learned something about me as well. That you prefer to rule through fear rather than justice. So sorry, Your Majesty. I'm afraid I already knew that about you." "No, indeed. I hope you notice that I am capable of choosing my battles." Her lips curved, her beauty returning full force. "If that's what it takes to win the war." She departed from the room like a feather, as if nothing at all had happened, her entourage falling into step beside her. Only when the guard's clomping feet had drifted down the halls did Kai slump to the nearest seat, head hanging over his knees. His stomach was heaving, every nerve shook. He heard a chair being set upright, and Torrin settled beside him with a heavy sigh. "We should find out who was really at fault for the mirror. If it was someone on staff, they should be suspended for so long as the queen is staying in the palace." Kai lifted his head far enough to peer over the table's edge. seeing the towering silver dome in front of the Queen's abandoned chair. Inhaling a breath, he reached forward and uncovered the mirror, then grasped its slender handle. It was smooth as glass, but sparkled like diamonds when he twisted in it in the dim lighting. He had only seen material like that once before, on a spaceship. Holding the mirror's face toward Torin, he shook his head, disgusting. Mystery solved, he said, turning the mirror around, so that his advisor could see the strange lunar rune carved into the back of the frame. Torin's eyes widened. She was testing you. Kai let the mirror tip back onto the table. He rubbed his brow with his outstretched fingers, still shaking. Your Highness, a messenger clicked his heels from the doorway. I have an urgent message from the Secretary of Public Health and Safety. Kai tilted his head, squinting at the messenger through his bangs. Couldn't she send a comm? He said, checking his belt with his free hand before remembering that Levana had requested no port screens at their dinner. He grunted and sat up. What's the message? The messenger stepped into the dining room, his eyes bright. There's been a disturbance at the District 29 quarantine. An unidentified person attacked 2 medroids, disassembled one of them, and then escaped. Kai frowned, straightening. A patient? We are unsure. The only android that would have recorded a good visual was the one that was disabled. Another android caught glimpses of the attack from afar, but only of the perpetrator's back. We've been unable to get an accurate ID. The perpetrator didn't seem ill, though. Everyone at the quarantines is ill. The messenger hesitated. Kai gripped the arms of his chair. We have to find him. If he has the disease... It appears to be female, Your Highness. And there's more. The footage we have shows her speaking to another patient, moments after she attacked the first medroid. A young boy by the name of Cheng Santo. He was admitted to the quarantine yesterday with stage 2 leukomosis. And? The servant cleared his throat. The boy seems to be recovering. From what? The attack? No, Your Highness. Recovering from the disease. Chapter 29. Cinder slammed shut the apartment door and marched into the living room. Adri was sitting stiff beside the hearth, glowering at Cinder as if she'd been waiting for her. Cinder clenched her fist. How dare you send for me like some common criminal? Didn't you think that maybe I was in the middle of something? How dare I treat you like a common cyborg, you mean? Adri folded her hands in her lap. You are a common cyborg, and one who is under my legal jurisdiction. It is my duty to ensure that you don't become a menace to society, and it seemed quite clear you were abusing the privileges I've allowed you in the past. What privileges? I have always allowed you freedom, Cinder, to do as you like, to go where you like. But it's come to my attention that you do not respect the boundaries and responsibilities that come with that freedom. Cinder frowned and drew back. She'd had her own angry speech repeating in her head the entire hover ride home. She had not been expecting Adri to bite back with a speech of her own. Is this because I didn't respond to a few comms? Adri tucked her shoulders back. What were you doing at the palace today, Cinder? Cinder's heart skipped. The palace? Adri raised a calm eyebrow. You've been tracking my ID. You've made it necessary to take precautions. I haven't done anything. You haven't answered my question. Cinder's internal warnings went off, spiking adrenaline. She sucked down a breath. I went to join the protests, all right? Is that a crime? I was under the impression that you were in the basement working, as you were supposed to be doing, to sneak out of the house without permission, without even informing me, to attend some gratuitous parade, and all the while Peony is... Her voice hitched. Adri lowered her eyes, collected herself, but her voice was thicker when she spoke again. Your records also show you took a hover ride today, to the outskirts of the city, to the old warehouse district. It seemed clear to me that you were attempting to run away. Run away? No, that's weird. She hesitated. There's an old parts store down there. I was going for parts. Is that so? And pray tell, where did you get the money for the hover? Biting her lip, Cinder sank her gaze to the floor. This is unacceptable, said Adri. I will not tolerate such behavior from you. Cinder heard shuffling from the hallway. Glancing around the door, she saw Pearl sneaking from her bedroom, drawn to her mother's raised voice. She turned back to Adri. After everything I've done for you, continued Adri, everything we've sacrificed, you have the gall to steal from me. Cinder frowned. I didn't steal from you. No, Adri's knuckles whitened. A few univs for a hover ride I could have overlooked, Cinder. But tell me, where did you obtain the 600 univs in order to pay for your... Her eyes fell to Cinder's boots, her lips curling in a sneer. Your new limb. Isn't it true that the money was reserved for rent and food and household expenses? Cinder's stomach clenched. I screened Eco's memory. 600 univs in just 1 week. Not to mention toying with the pearls that Garen gave me for our anniversary. It makes me sick to think what else you've been hiding from me. Cinder squeezed her trembling fist against her thighs, glad, for once, that she'd never told Eco about being lunar. It wasn't— I don't want to hear it. Audrey bunched her lips. If you hadn't been out dallying all day, you would know that. Her voice rose, bolstered as if anger alone could keep tears at bay. That I now have a funeral to pay for. 600 units would have brought my daughter a respectable plaque, and I intend to get that money back. We'll be selling off some personal belongings in order to afford it, and you will be required to make up your fair share. Cinder gripped the door jamb. She wanted to tell Audrey that no fancy plaque would bring Peony back, but she didn't have the strength. Shutting her eyes, she planted her brow against the cool wood frame. Don't just stand there pretending to understand what I can be going through. You're not part of this family. You aren't even human anymore. I am human, said Cinder quietly. The anger drained out of her. She just wanted Audrey to stop talking so she could go to her room and be alone and think about Peony, the antidote, her escape. No, Cinder. Humans cry. Cinder sank back, wrapping her arms protectively around herself. Go ahead. Shed a tear for your little sister. I seem to be all dried up this evening, so why don't you share the burden? That's not fair. Not fair? Audrey barked. What isn't fair is that you are still alive while she is not. That's not fair. You should have died in that accident. They should have let you die and left my family alone. Cinder stomped her foot. Stop blaming me. I didn't ask to live. I didn't ask to be adopted. I didn't ask to be made a cyborg. None of this is my fault. And Peony isn't my fault either. And neither is Garan. I didn't start this plague. I didn't— She stopped herself as Dr. Erland's words crashed down on her. Lunars had brought the plague to Earth. Lunars were at fault. Lunars. Did you just short-circuit? Cinder shook off the thought and threw a silent glare at Pearl before swinging back to Audrey. I can get the money back, she said. Enough to buy Peony the most beautiful plaque, or a real tombstone even. It's too late for that. You've proven that you have no part in this family. You have proven that you cannot be trusted. Audrey smoothed her skirt over her knees. As punishment for your thievery and for attempting to run away this afternoon, I have decided that you will not be allowed to attend the annual ball. Cinder bet back a wry laugh. Did Audrey think she was a fool? Until further notice, Audrey continued, you will only go so far as the basement during the week and to your booth at the festival, so you can begin repaying me back the money you stole. Cinder dug her fingers into her thighs, too incensed to argue. Every fiber, every nerve, every wire was trembling. And you will leave your foot with me. She started. Excuse me? I think it's a fair solution. After all, you bought it with my money, therefore it is mine to do with as I please. In some cultures, they would cut off your hand, Cinder. Consider yourself fortunate. But it's my foot! And you will have to do without it until you can find a cheaper replacement. She glowered at Cinder's feet. Her lip curled with disgust. You are not human, Cinder. It's about time you realized that. Jaw working, Cinder struggled to form an argument. But legally, the money had been Audrey's. Legally, Cinder belonged to Audrey. She had no rights, no belongings. She was nothing but a cyborg. You may go now, said Audrey, casting her eyes toward the empty manual. Just be sure to leave your foot in the hallway before going to bed tonight. Fists clenching, Cinder drew back into the hallway. Pearl plastered herself to the wall, eyeing Cinder with disgust. Her eyes were flushed with recent tears. Wait, one more thing, Cinder. She froze. You will find I've already begun selling off some unnecessary items. I've left some faulty parts in your room that were deemed worthless. Perhaps you can find something to do with them. When it was clear that Audrey was finished, Cinder stormed down the hall without looking back. Anger sloshed through her. She wanted to rampage through the house, destroying everything, but a quiet voice in her head calmed her. Audrey wanted that. Audrey wanted an excuse to have her arrested, to be rid of her once and for all. She just needed time. Another week, 2 at the most, and the car would be ready. Then she really would be a runaway cyborg, but this time, Audrey wouldn't be able to track her. She stomped into her bedroom and slammed the door, falling against it with a hot, shaking breath. She squeezed her eyes. 1 more week. 1 more week. When her breath had begun to settle and the warnings in her vision disappeared, Cinder opened her eyes. Her room was as messy as ever, old tools and parts scattered across the grease-stained blankets that made up her bed, but her eyes immediately landed on a new addition to the mess. Her gut plummeted. She knelt over the pile of worthless parts that Audrey had left her to find. A beat-up tread punctured with pebbles and debris, an ancient fan with a crooked blade, 2 aluminum arms, one that still had Peony's velvet ribbon tied around the wrist. Clenching her jaw, she started sorting through the pieces, carefully, one by one. Her fingers trembled over every mangled screw, every bit of melted plastic. She shook her head, silently pleading. Finally, she found what she was searching for. With a dry, grateful sob, she crumpled over her knees, squeezing Eco's worthless personality chip against her chest. And that is the end of Book 3. Join us tomorrow for the start of Book 4.